Good afternoon, everyone. It's just gone past 2 o'clock. We're ready to start, please. Prynhawn da, good afternoon, croeso. Welcome to this multi-location meeting of the Cabinet Scrutiny Committee on the 20th of December 2023. I am Councillor Phil Rogers and I'll be chairing this meeting. Please could you ensure that your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, when asked to raise your hand, if members who are virtually viewing this meeting could raise your electronic hand, and for the members in the chamber, just raise your hand. For the purpose of declarations, I would like to confirm that we'll be scrutinising items 5 and 6 of the Cabinet papers today. Just to confirm, item 9 was scrutinised at an earlier meeting of the Joint Cabinet Environment, Regeneration and Street Scene Services Committee. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
I have a declaration for item 6 as a trustee of Carnarvon Mardy, and I shall leave the chamber when it's discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Henton.
Hi, I'm the chairperson of Dyffryn Clydach and Brincourt Historical Society, and we rely on funding.
Thank you, Councillor Henton. Councillor Percy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm a trustee of Talbot Community Library listed in the report on item 6. I've clarified with Craig and have dispensation for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Alison will send out the necessary forms if you could return them to her, please. Agenda item 3, pre-decision scrutiny. We're now going to move to the Cabinet Board agenda. Item number 5, the budget for 2024-2025, which are on pages 3 to 68 of the Cabinet agenda. Officers, would you like to add anything additional to the report? Karen, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just wanted to say very briefly that we face yet another very challenging budget position when we're looking at 2024-25. And you'll see that we've done quite an extensive exercise that's taken the most of the year, actually, to look at opportunities for increasing income and reducing expenditure across the council, while seeking to limit the impact on jobs and services. So, you know, we very much value any feedback from the Scrutiny Committee this afternoon. I think we need to note that the Welsh Government has published the provisional settlement for local government today. And I think our reading of the information, which we've only been able to look at very briefly, is that the proposed budget for 24-25 is going to worsen the council's budget position beyond what's actually detailed in the report. Our intention is to do an assessment of the information that's been announced this morning for early January, and there will be a special cabinet meeting that we'll be asking for so that we can formally report on the analysis that we will be undertaking of the impact of what's been published by the Welsh Government this morning, and provide some further advice on how we can bridge the increased gap that we believe we now have within the council's resources for 2024-25. I don't believe, Chair, that should stop us from scrutinising the report this afternoon, or indeed proceeding to consult the public on the work that we've done so far. That can only be helpful. And I think we'll try and bring the advice forward as early as we can to try and support the scrutiny process in January, because we'd very much welcome contributions from each of the scrutiny committees when we get into January, just to see, you know, collectively what else we can identify we might do for next year to try and reach a balanced budget position, but as I say, limit the impact on jobs and services. So that's all I wanted to say by way of brief introduction. Chair, I think Hugh probably just wants to come in and just talk very briefly to the report.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so just to remind members that the purpose of the report today is to seek permission from the Cabinet to actually consult on a range of proposals, not seeking for any decisions around any of these, so just consultation with the public over the next 3 weeks. Members will be familiar with the report. It was published last week and I took members through it in detail in a seminar. Whilst we've done lots of work to date, the report still shows a budget gap of £2.7 million for next year, which, as Karen has alluded to, has probably been made worse by the settlement information this morning. I hope when members have had a chance to look at the report that they will see I've taken feedback from some of the comments last year in terms of some of the presentation and the detail. So there's a lot of detail in the report, which hopefully members will find helpful in terms of scrutinising the proposal. So that's all I wanted to add, really, Chair. So thank you, and we'll sort of crack on with the questions now. Diolch.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Hugh. We'll now move to members' questions. I have a few before me straight away. I've asked a request for Councillor Sonia Reynolds to come in first, please.
Thank you. I was wanting to know, first off, I've got a few questions, if I may, and I was wanting to know first off, and forgive me for being thick if I come across in that way, and for not seeming to understand, but why was it necessary to wait until now to go out to consultation, given that we didn't wait for the settlement to be confirmed? So could we not have gone to consultation at an earlier stage rather than consulting over Christmas?
Who, please?
I think probably the answer to that is that we've been working up until the death in terms of trying to get these savings proposals and income generation proposals together as a corporate directors group, Councillor Reynolds. So, if we'd have been in a position earlier in the year, we may have been able to go to consult, but I think it's taken us until now to get to where we are now. And even, as I said earlier, this doesn't actually represent a fully balanced proposal going forward. So I think probably Karen may want to add to what I've just said as well. So thank you.
So in addition to what Hugh's just said, we have consulted on some specific proposals that are in the report. So the empty homes and second homes for council tax, which won't help us in 24-25, but potentially in future years, depending on what decisions members take in the new year. That is something that we've separately consulted on. The proposals then to make changes around homelessness and social care have been out to separate public consultation exercises. And I believe the street lighting proposals are currently out to public consultation. So I think where we've got the more significant impact on services, we have undertaken separate public consultation exercises on those matters, and the feedback from that will then obviously inform the final budget proposals when we bring them back. So I don't know if that's helpful. So where we've been able to take some things through earlier, we've tried to do that, but it's been immensely challenging just to, on the back of last year where we were looking at the best part of £20 million worth of gap last year, to find another large amount of savings was trying to limit the impact of the proposals we putting forward. We are still working on the final couple of million.
Thank you both. Councillor Reynolds, would you like to come back?
Thank you very much. They were the sort of answers I expected. I was just wanted to confirm that was the situation. I have some very specific questions as well. So one, I was wondering, there are items within the budget, and it's a large report. So every time I keep trying to find something, I lose something else. So I'm just going to mention the issue, and that is, we're looking at covering core expenditure from grants. So covering off staff jobs from grant funding that we have in. Does this mean that there is less money in the grant to actually fund and put out to frontline services? Is there a loss within this overall in terms of bringing money in to cover those core expenditures?
Thank you. Who, please?
I think that's probably a balance that each corporate director will have taken on board when considering their savings proposals around, whether there's any flexibility within the grants to cover those core costs. So yes, if we are using those grants to cover core costs, there's less to go elsewhere, basically. So, but it's a balance around how we can maximise that external funding to reduce the impact on the rest of the budget. Whether any directors want to comment on their specific proposals, possibly.
Thanks, Hugh. Can I bring Andrew in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hugh. I think the answer to that question is almost inevitably yes, because the grant is a fixed amount of money. And if we're going to use more of that grant to cover core costs, it's almost inevitable that there will be a reduction in whatever the activity associated with that grant. But I can give members certainly in my area, comfort that none of that is being done outside of the conditions of the grant. So everything we are proposing, we are allowed to do within the conditions of our grant. So, but I think the answer to your question is inevitable.
Thank you both. Councillor Reynolds?
And I've got other questions, but I'll come back after others if I may. But this one is just inflation and pay awards. I did mention this in the seminar that we had on the budget. My concern about this is that, having listened to things coming in terms, from other areas of the country, and talked to others, and knowing what's happening with the minimum wage. I refuse to call it the living wage, but the minimum wage out there, and the fact that's going up by 10%, and that's going to fuel inflation. We know that. Is a 4% assumption of wage cost increases really realistic? And I have a concern that this going forward could be a much higher number.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Can I bring Hugh back in, please?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, so we have benchmarked that assumption along with the other 21 councils in Wales, and it is consistent broadly with what other people are forecasting. You will have probably seen the inflation announcement this morning to say that inflation is now at 3.9%, a 2-year low, and pressure on the government to reduce interest rates accordingly. So, whilst inflation's been running at 12% recently, and we've had pay awards at around 6%, with inflation now at 3.9%. My view as a Section 151 officer, and I have to, when we get to the final budget, give my sort of assurance around the robustness of estimates. I will be saying I think 4% is reasonable. In terms of the living wage issue, within the inflation assumptions around the care sector in particular, we've assumed a 7.1% uplift in payments to care providers, which takes account of the 10% increase in living wage, but with a reduction then in terms of their energy costs, in terms of the way we calculate what we pay them. So we have factored that 10% into our external contracts, but in terms of our internal workforce, I'm comfortable that 4% is a reasonable estimate at this point in time. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hugh. Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you very much, Hugh, and thank you for the additional information you provided throughout the papers.
Thank you very much. Next person I have indicated to speak is Councillor Carol Clement Williams, please.
Thanks, Chair. I have 4, if that's okay. Shouldn't be long-winded. 1 or 2 of them is just to check my understanding. Page 4. So page 4 mentions the last one bullet point, sorry. It says local policy initiatives prioritised by the Rainbow Coalition, and it says around challenges for the council. This is a list of challenges. What does that refer to, please?
Can we check the page, please, Councillor Clement Williams?
Sorry, it's 4 on the iPad, so it would be page 2 of this paper.
Page 4 on the iPad. Oh yeah, I can see it. It's the last bullet, last but one
bullet point. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it refer to?
I think what we're referring to there, Councillor Clement Williams, is the priorities that were developed within the corporate plan. So, for example, the investment in catch-up, clean-up, green-up that we proposed last year. So basically, yeah, the corporate plan sort of priorities that have been developed in this administration.
I see.
Thank you,
okay.
Carol Clement Williams.
That's lovely. Lovely, thank you. I just want to check my understanding on this one. It would be page 4 of this paper. When considering the position for 24/5, this 3.5 million represents a gap which needs to be made good. Just for my colleagues and I, somebody asked you the other day in the seminar, I believe, or in another meeting, does the money that we have to replace the money from reserves, the 3.5 million from reserves, because we used it last year, and you explained that that was it didn't have to be replaced correctly. But the 3.5 million gap, what is that referring to? It's just the monies that we took out of reserves last year, we got to put into the base budget. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that
Lovely.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, that's spot on. Obviously, by using 3.5 million reserves to balance the base budget for 23-24, that we have to make that good going forward. Otherwise, obviously, we can't carry on using the reserves because they'll run out. So yeah,
that's fab. Thanks. I just wanted to check that my understanding was correct. Page 11 of the paper, delivering local and Welsh Government policies. I don't need a huge answer on it, but I was just wondering, as always, we beg them to make sure that the new policies come with the funding. Is there any that we know of coming that we know we're not going to be funded for?
Not at the moment. Obviously,
Okay.
the overall settlement doesn't fund anywhere near what we need. So I would say that's probably the biggest gap at the moment.
Fabulous, thank you. And my last one, it will be on page 13. So the second bullet point under income, it says that the assumptions include a 7.5% in total income receipts. So does that mean that 7.5% is going to come from the increase in charges, or does it mean it's going to be a mixture of increase in charges and kind of savings elsewhere? Yeah, that's what my question was on that one. Thank you.
Right. So we have assumed that for each income line, we will be able to achieve an additional 7.5%. That doesn't mean that every fee and charge will go up by 7.5%. That'll be up to directors and heads of service under whatever delegated.
The overall comes to 7.
Yeah, so it could be price, it could be volume, it could be different activity, a whole basket of ways of increasing income by 7.5% target.
Lovely. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to confirm, Chair, some of my understanding of the report. And I would like to take this opportunity, as I always do, thank Hugh and his team and every officer in the council that puts into these reports every year. It's an ongoing process. It lasts all year round. And again, I'd like to thank Hugh for the detail in this report. I think it's much better. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. It's enough from me.
Thank you, Councillor Clement Williams. We'll move along to our next speaker. Will be Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Diolch Cadeirydd, thank you. Yeah, I've got a few questions as well, but I'll start with some of the kind of overall picture stuff, because I think that is interesting to have read the settlement from Welsh Government today, and yeah, I'd noted that was showing 2.8% increase rather than the 3.1 that we'd modelled in this report. I'm assuming, based on the commentary from the Chief Executive at the start of the meeting, that there are other implications in that settlement, perhaps for grants and other things, which require further analysis, obviously, because the headline figure is more of a sort of a simpler calculation, isn't it? But just based on that sort of 2.8, 3.1% change, so it's 0.3% change in the revenue grant, where does that leave us in terms of the gap and the increase of the gap from that? Because obviously, reading the report, it states quite clearly in there that if there was no additional funding, that to close the gap, we'd be looking at a 10% increase in council tax. But what we're looking at here is a decrease in funding from our assumptions of 0.3%. So could somebody explain what the gap looks like with that 0.3% difference at the minute, and then what the council tax increase would need to be to close that gap based on our current knowledge, understanding, notwithstanding the fact we need to do more analysis?
Thank you, Councillor Percy. I'll bring Hugh in now then, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. So as you say, there's a lot of devil in the detail in terms of the settlement, which we'll have to work through. But if you just take a pure 3.1% down to 2.8% settlement, that's a shortfall of around £870,000 based on what we were modelling. So that puts the gap from round figures 2.7 million to 3.5 million. So as I've said in the report, council tax may have to rise by 10% to fund the gap. Well, that obviously now becomes 11 point something if we can't do more work in the new year to close that gap. But obviously, you know, as a corporate directors team, we will be working tirelessly over the next 2 months to try and get that gap down as much as we can, Councillor Percy. So that's, I suppose, all I can say on that. And thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Would you like to come back?
Yes, please. If I can continue with some questions, that'd be great. Thanks Hugh for that. That's very clear. And yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, isn't there, to to try and deal with the implications of this. Just in terms of 2 other sort of broader points, in terms of the current budget assumptions, how much is in there in terms of contingencies? Because when we see the full budget, there's often lines in of contingencies that sort of move around a little bit as we go through the budget setting process. So it'd be great if you could confirm how much of the revenue budget is contingencies at the moment. And then just another quick technical question. Reading the section on reserves, am I correct in saying there's currently about £1 million of headroom left before we hit the agreed threshold for general reserves?
Thank you, Councillor Percy. I'll bring it back in then, please.
In terms of contingencies, we included a pay contingency equivalent to 2% within the budget. We allowed 4% within service directorates, and we included 2% as a contingency. Pretty much that contingency is going to be wiped out now because the pay award for this year was on average for non-teaching staff 6.6%, so that contingency will be gone. We also included £2.8 million, which was a contingency stroke energy efficiency stroke renewable base budget within this year. You'll see within the proposals we're proposing to take £1.8 million out of that budget going forward, because we've identified that the actual work required to do that sort of work will be capital in nature. So that was a sort of contingency budget, but there's already a proposal to take £1.8 million out of that to leave £1 million in the base going forward. And in terms of a general contingency budget, I think off the top of my head is around a £700,000 budget that we keep set aside just as a general contingency within the overall £360 million council base budget. In terms of the general reserves, yes, you are correct. At the moment, there's £1 million headroom above the 4% target, but Cabinet last week received a report, as you will be aware, showing that the in-year position as at the end of September was showing an overspend, which obviously, as we mentioned last week, we'll be trying our best to get that back down as much as we can by the end of the year. But at this point in time, with an overspend this year, I wouldn't like to say there's any spare money in general reserves at all at the moment. And I think those were your questions, Councillor Percy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Percy.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks you for that. Yeah, appreciate the answers. I've got some questions on some specific proposals. Am I okay to continue, Chair?
Yes, continue, Councillor Percy. Yes, let's go through them. Yeah.
Thanks. So my next question regards the accommodation review, and we'll look at this in more detail, I'm sure, in scrutiny. But one of the sort of broader points in it I'm trying to understand is the objective still to reduce the number of civic centres from 3 to 2? Because it's in the papers that is the broad objective. But obviously what I'm noting as well is that there's investment in all 3 buildings in terms of reconfiguration, energy efficiency measures, levelling up funding, etc. So I'm trying to understand whether that sort of broad aim still stands or whether we've had to rethink that position.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Can I bring Nyron in for this one, please?
Yeah, diolch, Cynghorydd Percy. So yeah, in terms of the broad aim, that still remains the case. The intention is to bring a paper forward early in the new year with options around those 3 main civic buildings. There's also a few other buildings in the mix there as well, in terms of the annex in Neath. So you'll have seen in the appendix 7, I believe it is, of today's papers, the broader report on the accommodation review that's been undertaken. which indicates there's currently a lot of in-year work taking place around the 3 civic buildings. And you will have also noted from the Appendix 8 a number of initiatives around how we reduce our energy consumption at our 3 civic buildings, together with a number of other assets the authority owns. And when you look at the 3 civic buildings alone, in terms of the work that's been done, that's already indicating that we could potentially save in excess of 300,000 per year on energy costs based on the current consumption taking place. So I think the report will come back in the new year for members for wider discussion. It'll be an options paper to see where we go next in terms of those 3 civic buildings. Councillor Bussey.
Thank you, Nolan. Councillor Percy, I believe we've got one more item. I think I hope you're okay with that response. Thank you.
Yeah, diolch am atebion, Nolan, thank you. Yeah, so I've got a couple of other items just to raise. One is in relation to the ENV 12 and 13, relation to the canals. There's termination of Neath Canal Public Access Rights Agreement on lower section and termination of licence agreement on upper section of Neath Canal. Can somebody explain what they mean, please?
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Can I bring Nicola in on this one, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've currently got a licence agreement with the owner of the canal to enable use for leisure purposes of a section of the canal north of Resolven. And we've also got a public access agreement towards the southern end of the canal going through Britain Ferry to enable access to the towpath. We are currently, between the two of those licenses, we are paying £135,000 a year. Now, we have got extensive public rights of way along the length of the towpath. Admittedly, there are gaps at certain locations, and what officers will now be doing is to identify whether or not we can demonstrate in that gap that there is a right-of-way argument that we can potentially put forward to the owner of the canal to secure that status. And if not, whether or not we can just have a public access agreement where, rather than paying the owner of the canal towpath to undertake the maintenance, which is like trimming, overgrowth, vegetation and so on, and keeping the paths clear, whether or not we can incorporate that into our maintenance programme as a local authority, because it may well be more reasonable in terms of cost to the council. So there's a number of areas that we will look to pursue to ensure that we try as best we can to maintain access to that towpath, but reduce the financial costs to the authority.
Thanks, Nicola. Councillor Percy?
Yeah, thanks for that, Nicola. Just as a brief follow-up, does the section of Britain Ferry include the current active travel route?
The public access agreement extends all the way from just slightly north of the M4 bridge right up to Neath. So yes, I think it does.
Okay, so subject to the discussions on this, there is a risk that we may lose public access rights along the active travel route that's established there.
We've got a number of areas of land where there are permissive rights, for want of a better term, throughout the county borough. And we will be exploring all opportunities to ensure that those access rights are maintained, but at a reduced cost, because we are currently paying significant sums of money, as I said earlier on, to a private company to maintain their own land. And in order for us to enable the continued use of very small portions of that land for walking and cycling purposes, we think there is an alternative way to ensure we get that continued access, but at a reduced cost. So we could incorporate those rights of way or those permissive routes into our maintenance programme, and we will cut the vegetation. We bought new equipment under the Clean Up Green Up programme, so we bought a small little tractor which is ideal for use along the towpath. There's no reason why we can't use that equipment and our existing staff rather than paying a third party to do the work for us. Hopefully that addresses your comment.
Many thanks, Nicola. Councillor Percy, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, that's great. I'm sure we can sort of maybe pick up this in a bit more detail as well outside the meeting. Just one last point from me now, Chair. It's in relation to the street lighting proposals, ENV 8. Although the Chief Executive mentioned at the start that she understood it was out of consultation, I don't believe that is the case at the moment. So what I wanted to check was, is there the original idea was that would go out to consultation separately to the main budget? Is that now going to be undertaken at the same time as the main budget consultation? Thank you.
Bring Karen in,
No,
please.
it needs to be a separate consultation, I think, Councillor Percy, because I think there's, quite a lot of detail in there. We'd be really keen to get some specific feedback on that specific proposal. We've been talking with the police, for example, and a range of other partners around that. So people will have two opportunities. They can comment as part of the general budget package, but it's our intention to specifically consult on that. And my apologies, because I thought that had gone live, clearly not. So we'll follow that up after the meeting.
Many thanks, Karen. Councillor Percy, are you happy?
Only one brief comment, just to say, in relation to ENV8, which is the street lighting proposals, as written in this budget paper, it isn't currently clear in the budget proposals that it involves switching off some street lights. So I just think, just in terms of the wording of the main budget paper, I think that should be clear, given the £300,000 figure is included, which is the full list of proposals that came through to scrutiny. That just the wording should be clear if it is going to go into this consultation, as well as a more specific one. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Percy. Bring Hugh back in a second then, please.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Percy. Yes, we will take that on board in terms of if that makes it through to the final report, to make sure it's absolutely clear what that's saving. Oh, for the consultation, right? Like, yes, we'll take it on board for the consultation as well, and I'll touch base with Nicola in terms of exactly what we are consulting on there and take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Councillor Percy. Anybody else would like to speak or ask questions on this particular item, please? Councillor Reynolds, please. Sorry, in the chamber.
Thank you. I wanted to touch on the situation with Celtic Leisure. I am really concerned that the decision was initially made in 2022 before the council elections, and it was a unanimous decision. Everybody backed it from the scrutiny committee that we're at to bring Celtic Leisure back in-house. The dates were initially set for the 31st or for the 1st of April 2023. That was changed. We then moved to the 31st of March 2024, and that was an agreed decision because of the change of administration, etc. That was documented at the committee, it was made by Cabinet, and it was then agreed by full council as a part of the strategic plan. And that was in April 2023. We were told by our constituents or by our residents and by union reps that that decision had been changed, and that they were informed of that by a note to staff in Celtic Leisure, and that there'd been a further delay of a year. There was no announcement to council. Councillors were not informed in any way. At best, that's disrespectful of council, and at worst, it's a breach of council procedures. Councillors should have been informed and not had to wait to be told by local residents or by union representatives. Given that last week we looked very clearly at what could be done if we invested to save in services where there were clear pressures. And we made some very key decisions which are in this public report or in this report and will go out to consultation about the future of homelessness services and adult services, adult social services. I'm at a loss to know why we didn't take up the recommendations of the original scrutiny committee in 2022 and proceed with putting together a real business case that looked at the real costs and the real gains to be made from bringing Celtic Leisure back in-house. There are ways of doing it which could benefit this council. if we look later in the budget report, you see whole issues there about sustainability and sustainable development. We have an obesity epidemic. We have mental health and well-being problems within our communities. We know that we have to meet the needs of our schools and of people in general for exercise and leisure. It may not be a statutory service, but it can really help us with our statutory services, and we can link those things up, and there are opportunities for gains and for gaining income through that and having a more sustainable provision across the board. No one has taken that work forward, and we see a delay again. Yet our leader has told us last week quite clearly that it will not get better next year, it will get worse. So therefore, we put off for a year, and then what happens at the end of next year? We look at Celtic leisure as if it's always going to be a cost. We don't do what happened last week with some excellent proposals from officers, look at it in a way where we could put a business case together where we can invest to save. And I see that as a negative. I am really concerned that we get to the end of next year and there's an attempt to put this off again. Can I have some commitment from this council that we are definitely going to bring in, as we made that commitment to do, we're going to bring in our leisure services, and we are going to do it in a way which is beneficial to our residents and to the councillors. They are not a drain on this council. They can save us money. They can make sure that people are better off in their well-being, that they cost less to social services, that they have a better quality of life. And I think that's key to the way we need to move forward.
I'm not sure if officers want to answer any of the specific questions in relationship to the funding issues that we have. I'm happy to pick up on the political questions. Yeah, and I don't know if Simon or Ken wants to come in as well. Did you two want to go before me on some of the road shows that we've had and spoken directly to Celtic? Firstly, Councillor Reynolds, can I just say, nobody knows what next year is going to give us. I didn't actually say it's going to get worse. We just simply don't know. We've heard today that inflation is continuing to come down. That could be a good sign. We also heard that potentially change of governments in Westminster, where funding to ourselves may get better. So, but this year, realistically, statutory services have been related. We've had 2 meetings or 3 with Celtic, face to face. I mean, one in Neath, and they didn't come to Ponty today. We've had a meeting with Celtic, with the union representatives of Celtic. We've also had meetings with union representatives nationally and those that work for this authority, where the employees are part of the commitment. You're quite right, the 64, there'll be a lot of members online and possibly in the chamber who were not part of that decision. We're still committed to bringing it back in-house. And yes, next year, again, I'll say possibly could be worse, but it could be a lot better. The reality is statutory services like adult social care, children's services, education are a priority for us as an administration. And when that decision was made, which you was part of, and Hugh can correct me if I'm wrong, but inflation was around 2-3%. And during the term of when we had to make decisions, inflation went up to 12%. Obviously, again, you're a very intelligent lady. So you'd understand the circumstances of such a high inflation and how we are trying to do the right thing. We heard this morning now from the settlement, again, not a very good settlement from the Welsh government, and that's going to put further pressures on us. I have related this to the workforce directly. I've gone to meet with them, and in the new year, Cara, myself and other officers and cabinet members will be doing the same. Currently, they are not potentially some of the workforce that are communicating with you. They're very satisfied with the proposals that we are putting on the table for the reasons we've explained to them. They understand that they're potentially safer currently while they're still working for Celtic. By bringing them back in-house, we would have to potentially put council tax, we heard about 10%, would be up to 13 or 14% to do that. When obviously Andrew's not here today, Andrew Jarrett, it wouldn't be the right thing to do. If we wanted added percentage to the council tax for a base budget, then that would be adult social care and children's services, in my opinion, first. So I think we are on a place where we've explained to Celtic, to everybody associated, and Paul Walker is doing an amazing job, which I know you'd agree with down there. And they are income generating, and they are working extremely hard. And I think, again, I haven't got the figures, but he would have them. There is movements in the system for improvements and making money. But categorically, I'll say it again, we're not in a position. And I'll finish with saying, yes, you're right. We may not. We may be having the same conversation next year. But that doesn't mean to say that you do it this year when we know we cannot, without knowing what next year would be. So from me, I think I'm explained it. We've had these conversations, and I've had feedback from the organisation. Now, obviously not individually, because pensions, terms of conditions for pays, etc., would be better within the authority than that they currently on. And so for individually, I would understand their point of view 100%. But we are all in a very difficult place, and we have to, as again, you will know, don't risk the chance of a Section 114 officer coming into this council, as we hear in England, and some of the waves that are going on across Wales as well with the settlement that has just been announced. So we have to protect the council. We have to balance the budget. And I still think, and I'll hold my hand up, that I think we are on the right page in what we are proposing at this moment in time. So I don't know if Simon or Ken want to come in, because it's their portfolios. They may have further information.
Thank you, Steve. Over to Ken, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I understand what you're saying about there being potential advantages around bringing Celtic Leisure in-house, but it comes with a significant, unavoidable additional cost around non-domestic rates, pension conditions, and so on. And we are simply in a place, having spent months trawling through every figure that the council has, where we just don't have the money. If we were going to find that money, it would be put directly on council tax. And at this point, I don't think that's justifiable to put that amount on council tax as people are struggling, or to prioritise that over and above adult social care and so on. So it is just a matter that, you know, we are where we are financially. We've had a lot of discussions, cross-party discussions in various groups around the budget. You know, the problems are well known by all of us. I would love to say, let's just do it, but we are where we are financially.
Thank you, Ken. Can I bring Simon Noyle in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sonia. And I'd agree with you to a certain extent. February 22, 64 of us agreed to bring the leisure services back in-house. We pushed it back a year last year because we became the new administration, and there were complications with that. And we didn't know whether we could make it happen financially. And that was supposed to happen then on the 1st of April next year, 2024. I think you'll agree with me that staff in the council have worked extremely hard well, they always work extremely hard, I should say that. but even more so recently with these development challenges that have come into the council, TCRE, Wild Fox, Freeports and the like. We all know of those, and it's taken up an awful lot of council and officers' time. And genuinely, I think staff, officers, directors, chief executive are tired. But I think I get from what you're saying is that you're wondering why we didn't put a business case together from Andrew Thomas's directorate to use part of our specific reserves as a business case to stand up something in relation to Celtic Leisure. Is that kind of right?
I'm asking why, if we can look innovatively at adult services and at homelessness, and we are, if we can reverse decisions on those about outsourcing, which we are doing, and that we support wholeheartedly, I'm asking why, given that there were suggestions for how this could go forward right back in the scrutiny committee that I chaired in 2022, and we said we were requesting then a full business case, why work has not gone forward to do that. And there are ways of mitigating the non-domestic rates. There are ways of doing this if we look at it and if we learn from what charities and what outside organisations do to achieve that. There are ways of doing it, and no one has taken the time to look. That's 2 years wasted while we've got staff who I'm told receive it well, but that's not what I've been hearing from staff. Very clearly, lower level staff are really worried about their futures, and they'd like to see the change happen. They'd like the security of coming in, and they'd like to move forward. I am clear that we have been wasting time on this.
Thank you, Sonia. It's important to get that clarity, and I'm sure Andrew will pick that up in a minute, why nothing has come forward from that business case and where we've been in that period. Just in terms of where we are with Celtic Leisure, obviously last year's budget, we agreed to fund some additional costs from last year's raising council tax and this year's raising council tax 2%. 2%, I think it was, Sue? Yes, 2%. So we've given some assurances in terms of that to our Celtic Leisure colleagues, because I think that's really important. When we met with them at Neath Leisure Centre 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I think it is, they came at us like a bull at a gate, and I'm not going to lie to you, they did. They were concerned. They had genuine concerns, and it was Steve, Sean, and myself that specifically sat and talked to them, just because that's the way it was set up. And I have an awful lot of sympathy and empathy with them in terms of where they are. But I also think that after speaking with them, and they were maybe 10 or 12 of them there, that they understood our position as well. And some of the things that they told us, we weren't aware of. Some of the things we told them in terms of budgets and the like, they weren't aware of. And ultimately, when the little session finished, it finished on an amicable level. I think they understood us a little bit more, and then we understood and took on some of their concerns. Now, it is incumbent upon us, and I've still got to provide the information to Ken, because I made notes from that meeting, and I said I would provide them to Ken and colleagues in the Cabinet. There are some things, they're fundamental things, which I think we can put right quickly. And the Celtic Leisure staff seemed happy with that. There are things that they're concerned about. One is their rate of pay, 2 is pensions, and 3 is the facilities, which we know about anyway. So I hope officers will be able to come back with some answers on the business case and the whys and wherefores on that. But in the new year, I hope we can, if we aren't able to, and I would love to be able to bring them back in-house if we possibly could financially and resource-wise. If we could do that, that would be fantastic. If we can't, we have to find ways of making sure that those staff know that they've got job security, know that they are considered well, and are well thought of in terms of workforce in the council, or as an arm's length organisation, obviously. And I think we need to make sure that we do that happen. In terms of your question, one of your questions which you asked, I think just to finish off, you said, can we guarantee that we'll bring it in next year? I don't think anybody in this room can put their hand on their heart and say we're going to do that, because the way of the economy at the minute, it is physically like trying to nail jelly to a wall. So if we aren't able to bring it in next year, and we aren't able to give that physical and committed guarantee that it's going to happen the year after, which I doubt whether we go into, we need to look to see what we can do to help them during this period. That would be what I would say.
Thanks, Simon. Chair, can I come back just briefly? Because I know Jeremy wants to speak as well. Just very briefly, we are already supporting the workforce. That was I failed to mention, to the tune of £2.5 million. We subsidise them, so we're making sure they keep their jobs in their current format. And on top of that, you know, it's important. Some of the points Simon raised is that if we added this to the budget, and obviously, as I explained, under social services, education are statutory requirements, they're priorities as far as I'm concerned. But if we did, hypothetically, if we did, then they become employees of this authority. You heard from the opening address from Karen and others that potential jobs with the funding that's come in through Welsh Government, when their jobs would be more at risk if they were back in-house at this moment in time, potentially, because of the circumstances of, you know, it could well be. But when you say innovative ways and everything, we got Paul Walker and Chris, who's obviously not here today, Chris Saunders, working extremely hard to do what they can to reorganise Celtic Leisure, because we all know, I've been here since 2008, and we've always subsidised them in the tunes of millions of pounds over the years. So, you know, things are changing, and we can't help what's going on outside of this chamber. We can only do what we can here for Neath Talbot. So I know you might want to come back. Sorry, Chair, I'm not trying to take over your committee, but I think Jeremy wanted to say something, and then
Thank you, Steve. Can I bring in Councillor Jeremy Hurley, please?
Yeah, to be honest, it was my responsibility in the first instance. So in defence of officers, I think business plans were drawn up and drafted, and obviously everything got thrown out the window because of the change in circumstances on so many facets of what was involved in that business plan, be it energy costs and everything else, which complicated things. As Steve said, the innovative ideas, we'd probably greatly appreciate anything that you can give to officers or ourselves. The other thing, I don't think there is a route around to get away from the NDR. You know, unless you set up another trust, unless you set up another kick, which is that there is no way to get around it, and that's the basics of it. But yeah, it was ultimately my responsibility in the first instance, but obviously a totally changed field of where it went with the circumstances outside our control. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hurley. Can I bring Andrew Thomas in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just try and unpack some of the numbers for members and refer members to innovative ways of improving trading performance. If we look on page 26, it's L4. You'll see there over the lifespan of the medium-term financial plan, a proposal to reduce the running costs of Celtic Leisure to the tune of £660,000, £460,000 next year, plus an additional £100 in the 2 years thereafter. So I think that's a very good example of innovative ways to increase income and reduce costs there for everybody to see. In terms of the fixed costs, which we can't avoid when insourcing happens, if it is to happen, pardon me, there is about £600,000 of that. It adds up to about 1.3 million. £600,000 of that is unavoidable rates, £500,000 in terms of increased employer pension costs, and about £200,000 worth of enhanced rates paid to staff that we currently don't have to pay. Sonia, if you've got different advice on how we can avoid the £600,000 rates, I'm all ears. When we looked at this before the decision to insource was taken, we had barristers' counsel's advice around this. I don't know if Craig here. I don't know if he can. I'm testing his memory now, to be fair to him. And we looked at all ways of trying to avoid those and insource at the same time. There was nothing that we could do. But clearly, if you are aware of any way we can avoid that, then we are all ears, because fundamentally the decision to insource has not been reversed. This is all about timing, and There's £1.3 million of the costs at the moment, which we believe are unavoidable. We do want to improve the trading performance of Celtic, and that's the £660,000 I just referred to. But even if we achieve those targets within the medium-term financial plan, the minute we insource, unless somebody can tell me otherwise, there's £1.3 million of additional costs. So Hugh, in response to a question earlier, said the funding gap is probably closer to £3.5 million at the moment. Were we to insource Celtic Leisure next year, that would be £4.8 million we'd be looking for.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Reynolds.
So thank you very much for that, Andrew, and thank you to Cabinet members. However, I still come back to the point that, okay, Jeremy, you've just said that a business plan was discussed and was, in existence at some point. At no time were other members of this council made aware of that. At no time, and this then goes to the scrutiny review going forward, because at no time were any other members of council asked to contribute and give ideas and thoughts and views towards that could help. Therefore, we have been unaware of those developments. We have asked and we have been blocked at scrutiny. We haven't been told what's going on. And then this decision to further delay for a year happens without any reference back to council or information to councillors. We've asked the Cabinet member, Ken, as to what the timing was of this, what committee meeting it was made at, and when and where, who made that decision. And we've had a reiteration of all the very good things about the budget, and thank you for that. But it is not the answer to the question that we asked. So there has been a degree of lack of coming back to members of council with information about this. And there are opportunities there. We have been subsidising throughout the last 2 years when we could have been looking at ways to save and change. So, I still hold that we have an issue here, and it's about sustainability of our leisure services, which they may not be a statutory service, but they do underpin the well-being. They support health. Has any discussions been held with the Health Authority about linkages and about social prescribing issues and all of that? It is, we'd like to know, and we don't know that, and it would be good to go forward. I think one of the things that I would like to suggest is that at the next education skills scrutiny meeting, we discuss setting up a task and finish group from that committee to look at the business plan and look at how Celtic Leisure can be taken forward in a better way going forward, and give others an opportunity to feed into that process.
Yeah, just one last point, if I may, on Councillor Reynolds' comments. As you know, we established a shadow cabinet some time ago. Can I ask if you've put that on the agenda at shadow cabinet level to discuss when you go meet officers?
We have asked a couple of times for that. I think that's been on the agenda twice, if not already, and it's just not been responded to.
Can I bring Andrew back in at this point, please?
Yeah, I just want to sort of comment on the business plan. The business plan that Councillor Hurley referred to earlier is a business plan that we were working on this time last year, when we were intending to bring Celtic Leisure back in on April the 1st, 2023. Obviously, when the decision was taken to defer that insourcing, that's when that business plan was shelved, if you like, for want of a better expression. And that's why there's no business plan coming forward this year, because obviously, again, the decision to defer. So when we are ready to insource Celtic, then members will see a business plan of what not just Celtic Leisure will look like, but then, of course, the whole directorate will look like with Celtic Leisure in it. So that's the purpose of that business plan.
Thank you, Andrew. Can I bring Karen in, please?
If you don't mind, I do want to pick up a point on the shadow cabinet, because actually this isn't within the terms of reference that the council has set for the shadow cabinet meeting. So when we've been asked questions in the shadow cabinet about leisure, what we've done as officers is point to the fact that it isn't within the terms of reference to discuss these issues in that forum. The appropriate forum, in my view, listening to the points that have been made around the chamber, is the scrutiny committees. Members can get advice from the monitoring officer and the head of democratic services as to how they can schedule an appropriate discussion in the right place in order to take these points forward. And that's what my strong recommendation would be. I don't think that is for officers to be drawn into the politics around all of this, with all due respect to all of you sitting in the chamber. You have mechanisms within the Constitution to be able to debate whatever matters fall within the powers of the Council. And I think, Craig, maybe you could write to members following this meeting to remind members of the options that they've got to take this conversation further forward.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you very much, Karen. I'd agree with your points about officers not being drawn into this, and thank everybody for their answers, and we'll be considering the ways forward going forward. Thank you.
Can I bring Councillor Simon Noyle back?
Thank you, Chair. May I just, with permission, just on one thing, we set up a budget strategy panel with one member from each group and party. This is not for officers, so I don't want to, this is not for that. But we set up that panel. Believe it or not, the first meeting was on Monday, the 9th of October. You were aware of that? Yes. And during those meetings, which were held 3 weekly, nothing came back in terms of Celtic Leisure I'm talking about now. In terms of going forward, obviously, the ongoing issues with Celtic Leisure have been there for 2 years, and they were always going to be a problem next year. I'm wondering why it wasn't brought up at that forum. That would have been a nice forum for it to be brought up and discussed and debated going forward.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up. No, a second, sorry, no. Okay, this is going back and forth. It's political now, right? I think we're discussing the budget, we are, and we're discussing an issue that hasn't been included. I'm going to bring Craig in to give us some advice on this now, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think ultimately, yes, the substantive elements we've got to consider today as part of this report are obviously the decision to proceed to the consultation. I can understand the issues ultimately as to where they're coming from, and obviously the clarification that's wanted from members. But I think the appropriate venue for these issues ultimately to be raised would be within the scrutiny committee, obviously when you're looking at individual proposals. And of course, then there are mechanisms within the Constitution through things like notices of motion and questions that obviously can be raised in other forums as well. So I think it's just important to bring members back to the fundamental question which you're being asked to consider here today, which is the draft budget which is before you, and obviously your determination now ultimately to move forward with the consultation exercise. So I think my advice would be, you have avenues for consideration to take this forward in scrutiny. I would raise them in those forums and look to use the process accordingly to be able to address them.
Thank you, Hugh. We're going to move along. People, I have one indication.
Sure,
of the speaker.
it is about the budget, and my hand's been up.
Excuse me, please. Can you not just interrupt? I am looking at the screen, and according to me, I have Councillor Carol Clement-Williams to speak next. Let's stick to the procedure, please.
Sorry, Chair, it was me. I thought you didn't see my hand. So all I was going to ask, Chair, is when is the consultation going live? It used to be the evening of this meeting, and could we be sent the link for the consultation as councillors so that we can put it out into our community pages? Sorry about that, Chair. I just thought you hadn't seen my hand. Thank you.
No problem, Carol. Thank you. Are we okay with Hugh?
Yeah, excuse me, sorry. Yes, as soon as Cabinet consider the proposals, the consultation will go live, and I'm sure that colleagues can send a link out to all members of council. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you
Is that
so
okay,
much.
Councillor Clement-Williams?
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments at this point, please? Seem to have gone off track a little bit on this. It's all about going out to consultation. This is okay. The recommendations are listed on page 21 of the Cabinet agenda and is for immediate implementation. I'm happy to propose it. Can I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henton. Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain?
I can see no abstentions, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet.
I can't see any indications to the contrary, Chair. The recommendation supported Cabinet.
Thank you, Alison. Moving further along to item 6, third sector grant funding award of grants for 2024 to 2025. They're on page 69 to 92. I believe that Karen would like to make a comment on this one, please.
Yes, if I may, I just want to make the Scrutiny Committee aware that we'll be changing the advice that we are giving to the Cabinet in respect to this matter later on this afternoon. Since the report was published, we've become aware that a number of organisations have submitted the same bids for funding into a number of different funding pots. And for those members that have been involved with this for some time, the third sector grant scheme that the council operates is meant to be a pot of last resort, not a pot of first resort. So we've always looked to make sure that any bids for funding are appropriately accessing other pots of funding, for example, wind farm monies, shared prosperity fund, etc., before people come forward and then ask for funding from what is a very limited third sector funding scheme that the council operates. So what we need to be able to do is to see the outcome of those other bids before we determine some of these bids that are in the pack this afternoon. The exception to that is the anchor organisations that the council established some time ago, where they are expecting funding to renew next year in terms of what's on the back end of the pack. So this is the table on page 92. But there are two other anchor organisations within the tables in the appendices. So on page 73, Canolfan Mardy, there's a proposal there to fund Canolfan Mardy in the sum of £33,000 next year. And then over the page, a Slavera Development Trust, a proposal to fund that organisation to the tune of £40,000. So we'll be advising the Cabinet to support the award of funding to those two particular organisations because they are, recognised and established anchor organisations that we decided some time ago. And all of the other bids then will be deferred for further consideration in January once we know what the outcome of the other funding decisions are. So we make sure then that we're optimising the money that's available within the third sector grant scheme. So I didn't want the Scrutiny Committee to be unaware that we're changing the advice that we're giving to the Cabinet later on this afternoon.
Thank you, Karen. I will be altering the recommendation when we come to it as well, okay? We're on to this then. Members' questions. Councillor Suzanne Paterson, please.
Sorry, Chair, I can't remember what that was.
No worries, Councillor Paterson. Okay. Councillor Sean Percy then, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, I guess I have a further question now. Now I've heard the introduction from Karen there. It's very interesting, actually, that we're taking that approach. I think that does seem very sensible. What my initial question was trying to understand the rationale in terms of the two options presented in the report. Whether there was any background really in terms of why we kind of looked at the two options of funding more organisations with a small amount of money or fewer with more money each. So I just wanted a bit of background on that, really, to be honest. But just to add to what's happened, what you just introduced us to now, Karen, if some of those organisations do get funding elsewhere, I'm assuming we're going to work our way down that list of recommended bids. Is that what we're going to do to allocate the full amount ultimately?
Thank you, Councillor Percy. I'll bring Karen back in then, please.
Yes, in a nutshell. So if we can make sure that we're maximising funding that's available in other places, those organisations then that remain on the list that can't access funding from elsewhere, we are likely to be able to help them more. And that's the way this scheme was always intended to operate. It's just that we didn't have that information about the other bids that have gone into those other pots at the time that this paper was being put together. So apologies that it's a last minute adjustment, but I think we just want to make sure that if possible, all of the organisations that have asked for funding get funding from somewhere, and then our pot of money will pretty much be the backstop on it. I don't know if there's anything more who you want to add to that.
No, I think that covers it, Karen. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Karen. I think it's quite clear. Councillor Percy, are you happy with the response?
Yeah. The only other thing was just, I guess, the aside from the change to the report, the general rationale about having those two sort of recommended lists. I'm just curious what the background to that was in terms of the way that was presented. I'm not sure if it always comes in that way or whether that's just something that's new for this particular report.
Yep. I understand, Councillor Percy. We bring Karen back in on that one, please.
I think this year, what we've, and probably because of the general funding position, we've had an oversubscription essentially to this fund. So you have got choices really that you can make. You can just decide to part fund everything that we feel is merit. The consequence of doing that is some of the organisations we've been funding for some years may actually not be able to continue on with a cut to their funding, because that's what a consequence would be of funding every organisation that's come forward to some extent. So I think the exercise that I mentioned earlier, if we can get opportunities to fund more things from other places, hopefully we get to a shorter list in the new year, and the council's money can just plug the gaps then to help everybody.
Is that okay, Councillor Percy?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Diolch, thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Are there any more questions on third sector grants, please? I can't see any. As we have a slight amendment to the recommendation, I'm about to read it now. The recommendation is that members approve the granting identified in Appendix 1 of this report to Calvan Mairdi and Yslavera Development Trust, and note that the additional request for grants be brought to a future meeting of Cabinet in January of 2024 for determination by members. That's the recommendation. I am happy to propose it. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henton. Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain?
I can see no abstentions, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Chair. The recommendation is supported to Cabinet.
Many thanks, Alison. On to agenda item 4. Or we call Councillor Reynolds back in. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. We're moving back to this Cabinet Scrutiny agenda. Agenda item 4, urgent items. You'll be delighted to hear that I don't have any. It only leaves me to thank you all for all your contributions this afternoon. I know it's been quite a tough autumn term, as ex-teachers call it. Can I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year? I look forward to seeing you all back and refreshed back in the new year. Best of luck to the officers over Christmas. I know we'll carry on working no matter what. Thank you all for all your hard work.